Juliette Hahn is a neuroscientist, a biotech executive, a faculty member at Columbia Business School, an academic advisor at Harvard Medical School. Juliette got her PhD in neuroscience from Harvard. She also has a master's and a bachelor's in neuroscience and physiological sciences, both from UCLA. She writes regularly for columns like Forbes, where she talks about career and leadership, and she takes a very scientific approach to her advice. I am so excited to have you here with us on Smore to share your story as a woman navigating the field of STEM and absolutely crushing it. I have so many questions. Welcome, Juliette.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarita. I mean, this is probably one of the most exciting interviews and conversations I have. Reaching people on internet is one thing, but reaching young
Yeah.
women that I really deeply identify with very personally, I could not be more honored and excited to be here.
Great, wonderful. So you are a CFO, which is Chief Financial Officer, and a COO, Chief Operating Officer for a biotech company. So your current role, can you tell us a little bit about what that entails? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so it's very exciting. And so our biotech company works on age-related diseases. So chronic illness, and that's a very broad way of thinking about our health. So number one, I would say indicator of what disease or if you will get sick is age. As you get older, you will probably have higher prevalence of everything from heart disease, cardiovascular, cancer, name it. And so we work on chronic illnesses like that. And in my role, I am thinking about not only the scientific aspect of how we develop these diseases or develop these discoveries, but also thinking about what does it mean financially to fund these discovery programs? What does it mean to recruit and hire and motivate scientists? What does it mean? So that's HR. And so what does it mean legally, thinking about intellectual property and other legalities of running a business. So all of that is under my remit as a CFO and the COO.
Wonderful. And as many people may not be aware of, the road to drug discovery in biotech is a long one. And what is the statistic? It takes about 10 years for a drug to come to market.
Yeah, I mean minimum 10 years. So 10 years is a as of documented process to get there. So before that, the scientist, the academic community has to be working on continuing to discover the mechanisms, studying things, even without knowing where that's going to lead. So just accumulating vast amount of knowledge. And at some point, it leads to an aha moment, and we say, hey, this could turn into a medicine. At that point, then we start to take a very much more focused effort into how do we think about putting this into humans and making it helping it cure a disease. And that process, that focused process alone is about 10 years because
Oh,
as
wow.
you can imagine, putting a chemical into a human body to have it do something is a huge, dangerous, and risky. So, and we don't take that lightly. And when we say we not only as a company, but as society or government, we don't take that lightly. So it takes many years of trials and tests and examinations to get there.
Yeah, it is fascinating to see. So I'm always very thrilled every time a new drug hits the market because I'm aware of just how much it took, both the effort from the scientific community and from people like you who have worked together to bring it to the market. And so before we get into all those, I want to take some time and start at the beginning, like at your childhood, right? Let's take a stroll down memory lane and talk about Juliet as a young girl. Tell us how she was, how you were.
That's how, if you go back to any of my teachers before college and said I became a scientist, I'm just going to tell you they'll be shocked Science could not be further from my mind. I think, and I read about a lot of other scientists and mathematicians, and they say, "Oh, I knew at an early age I wanted to do this." I did not. And the reason is this: I think that I want to debunk some myth about science that I had at the young age. And I thought there was two different things in the world to pursue. There was creative, and then there was science and technology and engineering and math. So I was more into arts and music and almost humanities. I loved reading. I loved drawing. I used to play the violin. And I thought being creative was just opposed to being a scientist and engineer, where in the early age we're learning rules, we're learning what is right versus wrong. It was very black and white, and I thought to myself, well, that seems very boring. If I am being tested by what I memorized in the books, or if someone already knows what the right answer is, then why am I wasting my time taking this test and trying to guess at what is right? So when I was younger, that's what I thought. So if you are listening to this and you're saying, "Well, I'm not interested in STEM because I like to be creative," I'm going to tell you that the truth could not be farther from what you think it is. Because when I realized in college, and I happened upon a biology class, and it was taught by a neuroscience professor, and this is perhaps very reflective of neuroscience, is that science is so unknown that you have to be creative to get somewhere. And yes, you learn the baseline, like you learn the notes on the music sheet, and then a musician, 10 musicians looking at the same music sheet will come up with 10 different ways to play it. Science turned out to be the same, and I was so shocked, pleasantly shocked, to discover it that way. Same facts on the page, and then 10 people will, scientists will tell you, well, I take it this way, and therefore I'm going to test out a new world thinking about this. So if anything, science not only takes creativity and even engineering discipline too, is you actually have to be so creative to come up with, within all these boundaries of laws and physics and all of that, to say, well, even with all these constraints, I can still think of a way to innovate, create a new product that could be used by somebody that we would appreciate. That actually takes incredible amount, a tremendous amount of creativity. Um, and that's something that I just did not appreciate as a child.
I, that's not something that kids are taught in school. There, it is very black and white. You either have an interest in that subject or you don't. And I feel that the importance of being creative is not stressed enough in the sciences. It's very subject and knowledge driven. So I love this answer. It's almost imperative that you have to be creative if you want to go into the sciences. You have to learn to think outside the box.
Exactly. In fact, even if you take fictional characters like Sherlock Holmes, who is famous fictionally for his scientific methods and how disciplined and knowledgeable he is, he's actually renowned for his creativity as a detective. He's actually a fantastic violinist, even in the fictional world. And even if you watch anything you're into, whether it be if you're into true crime and watch Forensic Files, it's never about, hey, we followed this formula and we got it. It's always someone had an aha moment of, let's think about these set of facts slightly differently and let's try out this hypothesis. That scientific method is a way to think about getting, not getting to the right answer, but what is the creative question and the answer that you can get to. So I found that it's not a set of facts like I thought it was when I was in junior high and high school, rather a method of thinking that allows you to be just tremendously, infinitely creative and open you up to possibilities of anything you want to do that is not limited by the world as it is today, but creating the world that it could be. That is truly the scientific discipline and training. And all of STEM, whether it be science, technology, engineering, and math, that's the world that can help you create the world that you want.
Love that. So were you a good student? Would you say you were a good student?
The funny thing about our educational institutions versus the real world is that the real world and entrepreneurs, they reward you for pursuing your passions and being dogged about your ideas. If you think about your preschool to high school institutions, it's not that. It's not
Mm,
about your passions. It's about following rules and order
yes.
and learning what they want you to learn, which I think there is some good in that, right? To
Yeah.
make sure there's a baseline of literacy, baseline of math and history, but beyond that, we're not rewarding that behavior. So that's my poor way to excuse myself from saying perhaps I also like to follow my interests and passions a little too hard when I was younger. I did well enough. I wasn't a troublemaker, but I when I thought something wasn't interesting, it was just rote memorization and a matter of testing who can memorize better and faster, I just didn't do as well. But once it came out to, well, you have to study it and memorize it in order to construct this, and it became more applied
Mm.
knowledge, then I did much better.
Great answers. So you had a specific turning point in your life where you decided, okay, I'm now into STEM. I like it. I'm going to go for it. Or what was there a specific turning point that you decided, or was that more like obvious? I have to go into the sciences. What was that like
Mhm.
for you?
Yeah, so I would say there were some aspects of it that were of building interest in my life, and then there was some inflection points and proof points. So the building interest was when I was a teen. I did volunteer for many years at this weekend program center that took in people with congenital mental disabilities. So, namely things like autism, epilepsy, Down syndrome. So, we took them in for half day, sometimes full day, so that their parents can do their things that they need to do, because these are often people who require some, if not full time, help. So, we would do fun things like sing and dance and do art activities with them. And I just found the experience very intriguing, not just rewarding, but also intriguing, intellectually intriguing, because we're all humans, and we're born with certain abilities and we take them for granted, but especially mental capabilities where absolutely mental health and mental normality, as we call it, um, is is not talked about enough. Now, there's more awareness in the US about that, but especially this is when 30 years ago, we didn't have as much awareness and definitely not enough understanding. So I saw a lot of questions came up in my mind around, of course, there's a scientific aspect of it. How can we born with a same species, but animals have much more homogeneity, but humans have much more heterogeneity in the way with different abilities that we're born with. Um, and then, not to say animals don't have that, but we see it more often with humans. There's something about our evolutionary process, as well as there was cultural and societal aspect where some families, as loving as they were shunned or ostracized, or especially mothers who felt incredibly guilty for feeling like they were the cause and foundation of their children's disabilities when they really weren't, because of what we think culturally, but it's really lack of education and awareness that we have, or lack of treatment even we have for people. So that was, I would say, something that kind of built over time, and it made me think about, how do I think about a world where we exist and we live when we are starting at a very different baseline, cognitively. And then I would say from the inflection point was when I was in my first year of college, when I was actually at the time thinking about majoring in economics or policy, or music history, actually, because I really loved music history, classical music. And I happened to take a biology class with a neuroscience professor who really opened my eyes to how neuroscience, especially, could be such a creative doctrine. So I decided to, at that point, in that moment, just declare my major and study it. And I just never looked back since. And I hope that still to this day, I want to contribute to a degenerative health, and some of the chronic illnesses are definitely mental. There is mental retardation, of course, when you're born, but also as we age, there's dementia and Alzheimer's and other even muscular dystrophies or even nerve degenerations like multiple sclerosis. These are all diseases of the nerve that happens with age. So I do think there were more proof points along the way that made me really find rejuvenation, even when things got tough, as to why this could be a rewarding path for me if I could continue to make a difference.
That's wonderful. So this was actually going to be my daughter's question. I said, hey, I'm going to interview somebody who actually went to Harvard to study neuroscience. So she will know the answer. It's fascinating, the whole field of neuroscience. There's so any any recent findings from this field is just immensely fascinating. So it's a great field. Now the other question I had is, so you had a you went to Harvard, you got your PhD in neuroscience. So there was a lot of research work. There's a lot of, as we call, bench work that you did. So what did you look at? What was your research in
Yeah.
this?
So one of the reasons I picked Harvard, aside from it being a great institution, is within neuroscience programs, different universities are renowned for certain aspects. So for Harvard, they're really renowned for mental health and as well as developmental neuroscience. So because they have a strong children's hospital as well as MGH that are known for those disciplines. And I was always interested in the developmental aspect of neuroscience, especially congenital disorders or disorders that you're born with. So for me, I was interested in particular, or I studied the model of autism as a disease called TSC, tuberous sclerosis complex. And with that, I wanted to become more translational. And all that means is how do you translate basic bench science into applicable human science? So when we look at humans that have people that have this disease TSC, it's a genetic mutation, and then we can actually create mice with the same mutation. But in mice, because you're able to create the mutation, you can isolate that mutation in certain cell types or tissue types. So for me, I in particular studied mutation of this gene that sometimes causes autism in humans, which actually makes it very interesting. Why do some people with the same mutation have autism and some do not? So we wanted to understand, is it because of a role of certain type of cells? And my thesis was around, I think there's an importance in white matter. All that is like fat in your brain. So the reason why your mom and your dad tells you you have to eat a lot of salmon and walnuts is to make sure you're getting good fatty acids.
Fish
So
oil, cod
fish
oil.
oil, exactly. So then I was studying, let's say, the fatty acid development of the brain during the critical period shortly after the birth of organisms. And my thesis was around this mutation causes some detrimental effect in this development. So that means that we're studying the mice. And we're studying the mice and we're studying if we were to hypothetically reverse the effects of this mutation, and can we reverse the outcome of the cell development in that mouse? So we can start to narrow down the difference, what is causing the cognitive, the deficits in humans by studying the mouse and their cellular development. Now, it's still very far from what you can do with humans or treating humans, in particular children who are very young, but it at least gives us some glimpse as to what the answer could be. And then hopefully with my research as well as future research of other scientists, we can start to form better therapeutic treatments.
So this research that you did at Harvard, do you track it now that you're not doing that anymore? Do you see where the field is advanced and how much your work has influenced that? Do you
Yeah,
stalk your
so
science?
I do once in a while, like I do like to stalk my science and see who cited it, what kind of publications are relevant to it for sure. And I do think it's amazing to see how other scientists have evolved the thinking around the mechanisms I studied, the scientific pathways I studied, And they're able to then build around, not even directly relevant to mine, but build around the hypothesis. And then you see relationships between different genes and different molecules forming in a way it didn't. So I think that is the beauty of science, is that I was so um, you have to focus very deeply on one thing. But it's really that one thing. You can't study everything. And so many other scientists have to come together to study the different pieces. And then some of the questions I had in my mind as to like, oh, I wonder what the downstream effect of that is, or I wonder what would cause this. And to see those relevant papers come out long after I left the discipline, I mean, it's incredibly rewarding, but also just, it just scratches that itch.
I agree. And to your point, science is such a collaborative effort. It is not done in silos, and there is just so much you learn from the whole and community, the scientific community itself, about the value of sharing ideas openly. Of so you also talk quite openly about uh, the importance of talking about the work you do. Is that I do notice that that is something that you are sharing online. And I also came across this as somebody, I'm an immigrant, I'm a woman in STEM, something that was not taught to me or made obvious to me, that you have to be more visible. You have to stand up and talk about your work. I came across a post where you talk about a mentor who kind of pointed out the importance of showing up for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I do think this is an important point. So when I left academia and I joined the corporate world, um, there is a big it's a new world. It's a huge change that I had to get used to. And you pointed out a couple of factors that in the perhaps it goes quote unquote against you in the corporate world, right? So number one thing is women. Women tend to be, just biologically, we're wired to be more collaborative, and we're not wired to say, hey, I need to assert my dominance in a group situation. So there's something about, let me figure out the group dynamic and let me chime in when I'm needed. So there's the woman dynamic of this aspect. And then there is the dynamic of a scientist. Scientists, like you said, people could disagree, right? You're never right. That's the beauty of science in some sense. Everything is called a theory, even though even the things that Einstein has put out, we say it's a theory, right? So, because we're always open, humbly open to the fact that there could be an exception or we could be wrong. So there's always this thing around self-consciousness around, well, if I don't have 100% fact base and confidence, then I shouldn't speak up because there might be better ideas. So there's a scientist aspect of it. And there's the cultural aspect of it where I'm Korean, and some of these cultures that we come from is more hierarchical. This deference to the elders. There's someone of authority that is going to tell you when you are or not allowed to speak. So you confine your existence in a room to a size that someone else has dictated for you. So there's this cultural aspect. Then, of course, for some of us, there's immigrant aspect. Let's just say, is there something about this culture that I don't want to disrupt? So we're more likely to observe than to act. So all these, and then for me, coming out of academia into the corporate, I'm saying, well, I am fish out of water.
Yeah.
This is totally different from what I'm used to. So let me just learn first. And the quote unquote real world, or corporations or work world, professional world, doesn't work like that. And it's not to say you have to change who you are. That's almost harder, and you shouldn't. You should respect your heritage and your culture. And there's something about not being individualistic. There's something about being a woman and being more empathetic. There's something about being a scientist and being careful with what you say. There's beauty in being an immigrant or coming from a culture that values wisdom and elders. Right? I'm not saying ignore all of that, but perhaps you should put value and respect to your ideas and say, my ideas are worthy of being heard. And if anything, you're selfish by holding that great idea back.
Well said.
And now you're allowing noise to exist because you're not sharing your ideas that's just as good, if not better often, to exist in the space for others to learn from. And that's the mind shift I had to make. And I think a lot of us have to make for different reasons. And I think what my mentor also said, by the way, the best mentors aren't always going to be people who are exactly like you. And I think that's another mistake people make.
Yeah.
Certainly, people who are like you, that you find yourself identifying with and resonating with, who has walked exact path, could be great mentors. But you should also get advice and mentorship from people who are not at all like you, who don't see things your way, who's just going to maybe simplify or even trivialize your problems at times and say, instead of thinking too deeply about it, just do this. And that's the advice I got. You know, my mentor was nothing like me in many ways. He is a white American man who has never been in academia, but he acknowledged that I have these challenges inside in my head that he cannot empathize with because that is not his background. So all he could tell me was that whatever that is, I have to just, doesn't matter. I have to act different. As in terms of, even if I feel uncomfortable saying something, I have to practice saying it. Even if my head tells me you shouldn't do that, I have to practice doing just that. And I think that's such a powerful message because often we're going to wait until, well, let me work out all these internal hurdles and my innate challenges in order to be ready. But what he was saying, even if you're not ready, if you can get yourself to act today, you should act today. And once you start to act in a way you would like to act, there's something, this internal calibration that happens that makes you realize, if I feel uncomfortable today, then I am doing the right thing. So now I measure myself not based on how can I be comfortable because that's who I am, but how can I get uncomfortable? Because that means I really push myself beyond what I have been raised to be or what I've been trained to be.
So is it just a mindset shift, or are there any specific steps or, tricks or tips you have to kind of talk yourself through to overcome that hurdle?
That's a good question. Look, I think you have to figure out the best way that's going to work for you ultimately. And for me, it was, in order to recalibrate myself, it's like when you're trying to get physically better at something, I would say anything you want to get better mentally, you can always find an analogy that's physical. Because at the end of the day, brain does work like a muscle. So if I want to work through a certain shift in mindset, then I can come up with a number of exercises to shift that mindset. So whether it be, for me, it meant that when people said something in a meeting room that I thought sounded great, but I couldn't, and I agreed with, and I had the same thought even, but I couldn't get myself to say it, but someone else said it, I would write that down and I would practice saying it out loud that night and just feel uncomfortable saying it, even though I was saying it in the privacy of my own house. Just saying those ideas and committing them to words was uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
But then I realized that that comfortable feeling that I had is what I had to feel in the moment. So I got myself used to the discomfort. It's like when athletes start to train and then you start to work out and you feel fatigued and you feel out of breath, but you over time tell yourself, okay, well, that's good. I'm supposed to feel out of breath. So then you push through that versus someone who may have never worked out before. The first time they feel out of breath, then you're panicked and says, what is going on with my system? This isn't good. This can't be good. But once you normalize that sense of discomfort and if that becomes the norm, then that becomes essentially your mindset shift.
Wonderful. So the idea is get used to being uncomfortable. So you just train yourself and tell yourself this is okay. This is it's not
I
it's
think
not
that's right.
bad.
You know, I tell my, especially my women team members, we, I think, are not doing ourselves, we're doing ourselves disservice because we keep telling everybody, especially young people, you got to be confident, you got to, say what's on your mind. And I think we should actually tell people you don't have to be confident. It's actually, many of us are so unconfident. We're actually scared. And then so a lot of people, what they end up doing is like, well, I'm not confident, so therefore I'm not ready. Oh, I feel nervous about this, therefore I must not be ready. And what actually is that a lot of people, when they do feel nervous or feel like they're less than or feel they're not ready, some people call that excitement. Some people call it excited. I'm eager. I can't wait. But some of us call it nervous. I'm not ready. I'm not confident. So I think that we have to, as society, change the language and say, it's okay if you're not confident. It's okay if you're nervous. It's okay if you're scared. Everybody is. They're just calling it something different.
Wonderful. I think there's so much value in that. I also going to throw something else into the mix, the idea of perfectionism. As women, we are like, if it's not perfect, it's not worth doing. I mean, I myself am guilty of doing that. I have to constantly tell myself that it's important to do something, have some progress, and not wait for the perfect moment. The everything has to be perfect before I can do it. Uh, how do you approach that? Is that something that you are plagued with, or it's like, it's okay, I'll just do the best I can?
Yeah, so I absolutely am. And I think it holds a lot of us back. And then perhaps it's some of it is self driven. To your point, it's around like, I have to wait until it's perfect. I do think some of that is external driven by how critical this world is. So, especially if you spend any time on social media, even if it's not directed at you, you see other people very ruthlessly and coldly criticizing others. And I do think that that makes someone look at that and say, well, I don't want to put myself or subject myself to that kind of ridicule. So why would I? So there's many aspects of that hinders people from doing something imperfect. And I personally am working through that myself. And one of the personal reasons why I created a social media account to talk about this stuff is that, one, not only to share what I've had to figure out with others about my own struggles and my own challenges, but also to get used to these criticisms that exist and also get used to putting out imperfections, things that are unedited and unvarnished, and getting and realizing that, well, I put that out there and I didn't, nothing, I woke up still in the same bed and I'm still the same person. So getting used to the feeling of there's blemishes and I'm still okay. And then I do think another mindset shift that's important is when you put out something so instead of thinking of it as like you're putting out a final product, therefore it has to be perfect, put out a draft that you're iterating. If anything, let me switch your mindset and point of view to everyone who's listening to this. If anything, I think it's a bit arrogant to think that you can create perfection with no one else's input, that you alone can create that and put that out into the world. You have to be humble enough to say, I can't do it. I can only create a draft. And with input of others who know this better or have other ideas, I can create towards perfection, whatever perfection means. So I want you to think of everything you put out as, I'm just putting out a draft that will get better with time because I need help. And I think that especially people who work hard, who are driven, who've really accomplished a lot in life have hard time sharing a draft version. And I did too. I feel like everything has to be edited 10
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And I just feel so uncomfortable putting out a beta version of anything I'm working on. But a lot of people who are truly successful are ones that put out a draft and iterated as they moved along. And you just have to believe that that's your process too.
That is so correct, because even when you think about it, it's it's the idea that, okay, you are putting something out that's has to be perfect. But what if it's not? It's not the end of the world. But for a lot of the people that think like that, it's also somewhere that refusal to fail. So how has your experience of failures in your graduate school journey or even today, how has that shaped how you look at failures?
So that's a great question. And 1 year recently, I was more or less I'm always very happy with how my life is and how it's going. And I reflected and I thought to myself, in the recent years, I really haven't felt rejection. Okay. Now, one could look at that and say, wow, you must be immensely successful. You must be getting everything you want. But I reflected and said, I'm not sure if that's true. I think that my lack of rejection is a function of me not putting myself out there. And if you look at yourself and say, I haven't failed, I God, thank God I haven't failed. Oh, thank God I haven't been rejected. I think you should say, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't failed or been rejected in the recent years. And here's why. If you rejection or failure is a proof that you're actually getting to the next level. If you are not feeling rejection and failure, then you will never know if you're really getting to your potential. You're actually doing yourself huge disservice if you're not feeling that way, is what I learned. Because every time I got rejected was when I was able to say, well, if I got rejected by, let's say, taking 10 steps, then at least I could say, okay, I guess I was ready for step 7 and how I can make that 3 delta gap. But if you've never been rejected and I always went for step 5, I would never know that I could have
Yeah.
gone to 7. And that's really the fundamental way I started to shift my thinking. So when I think about my quote unquote failures of the past, I think of it as, okay, I'm calibrating where I stand versus where I could go. So if you are not getting rejected or failing, then you are not calibrating your potential and your baseline. And you're just existing in a safe space that could be close to where you could be, or it could be so far from your
Yeah.
potential. You're doing yourself disservice. So every time I've been rejected, and since I had that epiphany, I started to write down a celebratory note to myself of when I was rejected. And I said, wow, incredible. That means on this, I really did push myself beyond, and I learned that this is where I stand.
It's okay. How did you get into finance from neuroscience? Tell us
Yeah,
that path.
so I left academia because I wanted a better direct line into what I do versus everyday outcome, the real world outcome. And I thought maybe learning about the business world, how the decisions are made as to how the science is applied would be something I would like to do. So taking my business background and the language of science I speak, and now applying that towards how the decisions are made in terms of what science is funded, what type of programs are resourced, and not just doing the science myself. So in a way, scaling my own efforts. So I decided to go into the corporate world. I started out as a consultant at McKinsey, and then I jumped into the world of finance. And there's different types of finance, private and public, and different types of investment vehicles. And I quite enjoy thinking about before a lot of the scientific funding goes, or a lot of any funding actually goes towards most perhaps lucrative drug pathways or drug programs. But there needs to be a consideration also for that is important, by the way. That it's not that that's bad because that money that's made then goes back into developing future science as well. But there's also consideration for what type of science is needed, as well as what type of science is actually has higher chance of making it. So the money can be put towards something that will actually advance into a
Yeah.
therapy. So if I think about a complex question like that, I took interest in how those decisions are made. And in many ways, that is the basis of investing, whether it be venture capital or private equity. You think about, I have this pool of money or resources, and how can I put it towards an idea that's going to either make money or advance an initiative or a mission, or has high chance of success or impact. So when I was starting to learn about those concepts, I also wanted to teach and give back and connect with the students. And I just happened to be in New York, and Columbia's here. So I am teaching that those concepts, investing principles and concepts.
Wonderful. So you have had uh, the experience of going to some of the most prestigious universities in the world, if you will. What has been like now that you're there as faculty? You're also the academic advisor for Harvard Medical School students. Uh, so when you look at the children who come into these universities today versus where you were, how has that changed in terms of thinking, and how has the environment for these children changed, and how should they be better prepared to navigate these graduate school years or postgraduate school years, or just education in general, if they want to pursue a career?
So this question is very near and dear to my heart because I have three nieces, um, young nieces, different ages, and a goddaughter, all women of color, especially. So they have the layers of this question, which is any young person, no matter the race or gender, is growing up in a world that I can't imagine how it feels for them compared to what I had, in terms of simplicity of external information
Yeah.
and social lack of social media that I had growing up, as well as girls, especially there are a lot of positive changes in the messaging around what
Yes.
girls can be, and um, women still continue to progress, albeit slowly,
Yeah.
towards equal pay and things like that. At the same time, and so when I look at my nieces, and I do think about that quite a bit because I remember when I was their age, which is to say they range from kindergarten all the way to almost high school. I think that they're more astute about the world than I am. I was probably because of social media and things like that. Um, and I think that back then, as also when we thought of people who are successful, we often looked at much older role models who've been
Yeah.
doing something for 30, 40 years. But we now came up in a tech era where we are seeing famous entrepreneurs and people who are doing well, like AI, who are much younger, right? So they are starting to, or even influencers who are famous in the social media. So now their concept of what it takes to make something is very different from what we thought it was going to take with someone much older, a lot of veterans of their field. So when I think about that, and I think about what they can be doing to be successful, I do think that their processing cycles have to be faster. They have to iterate much faster. Gone are the days where you can think of a product, invent a product, and take 5, 10 years to do it, any product. And then that's what's out there. People have not only shorter attention spans, but scientific progress, technological advancements are happening much more quickly. And people are getting much faster information about what other people are working on, and you're also able to connect with others. So I think that the young generation has to be more than ever encouraged to iterate faster, put hypotheses out there, be okay with mistakes and quote unquote failures, and be taught to constantly experiment. And which is why I think, especially for these young minds, I think teaching scientific methods of how do you become a structured thinker in terms of what you're experimenting, I think that's why it's becoming even more critical.
I love that answer because I think that there is that narrative where the scientific method is only applicable to the scientists who are working in a lab, but there is so much that could be used and we could benefit from if everybody just used that approach. So I love that answer from you. You talked about social media, and you have a very growing audience. How many do you have totally across your social media?
Oh, I don't know how many across. I think on Instagram now I have maybe 75,000, and TikTok I have some tens of thousands. So
Oh, so
yeah,
I
it's a
counted it. I counted it because I
oh,
was
you
like, I
did.
need to, yes. So I was like, okay, because there is. Okay, so when I was on Instagram, I found you on Instagram. When I was on Instagram, scrolling through in between the dance trends and in between the cooking videos, you showed up and you started talking about how to be a professional, how to talk with confidence, how to be more self-aware, and what are the most important indicators for career success. I was like, what? This is amazing. I love this. And then I just started following you and just gaining so much information and wisdom from you. I was like, why aren't more women of science doing this? So I was like, okay, let's see, how is this growth? And I kept tracking you. I mean, sorry, stalking you. I was like, this is amazing. Like, she's getting such good response. Like, people are loving it. This is so inspiring to see. So my question to you is, you have your plate full, like pretty much with everything that you're doing between your day job, your uh, teaching, your advising, and then you're doing social media. Is Why did you choose to do that? Is it something that you're truly interested in, or there was something bigger behind that?
That's a really, that's something I also ask myself every day. In some ways, because here's why all the reasons why I shouldn't be on social media and I didn't want to do it. One is, social media, especially for some, there's some generation differences. I
Yeah.
think that if you didn't grow up posting about your life in social media, then it's even more uncomfortable for social media. Myself, absolutely part of that group. Two is I also just like being more private, just because I just don't want public scrutiny or criticism from somebody I don't know. And three, I think that, well, what do I have to share that someone else isn't doing better?
Mm.
So, idea that, well, whatever idea I have, there must be somebody who is doing it better than I am, who can tell it better than I am. So, I just didn't think about that being part of my life. And I think at some point in the pandemic, and I was absorbing a lot of information. So I love learning about everything, just absolutely everything. There's few things I realized is one, the new generation is the future. They
Yeah.
truly are. And Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and whatever generation that comes next, we as generations that continues to get older have to think about not only teaching them or doctrinating them in some way, but how do we continue to understand them, like what they're going through, so that if they allow us to, we can help them, and we can share what we think might be helpful. And in order to do that, we have to do it in a medium that makes sense to them. And I wanted to get better at that, whether it be because even in my own company, I want to think about how can I communicate better with the younger generation. And I don't want them to learn my language because I'm getting, aged out at some point, right? We have to accept that.
Yeah.
And I should learn how they talk and how they would like to communicate and prefer to. So I want to continue to do that. So part of that was exploration and learning about how can I adapt my communication style to a style that is growing so I can reach a new audience. And also challenging myself to be comfortable about uh, putting myself in an iterative fashion draft that's imperfect. So there was that aspect of it too. And three is I do think that there are challenges that I had to work through. By no means, I'm absolutely so far from having figured this all out. And I just wondered, is there at least one person out there that is figuring out the questions that I'm figuring out? And can I share what I learned and will it help them? So those were some of the numerous factors that had me start this content. And I really didn't realize so many people would resonate. I thought, if anything, like you said, like people scroll on Instagram looking for moments to laugh
Yes.
at, moments of, moments to see something funny or entertainment. And I thought I was just mudding people's For You pages with things that people may not want to hear about
Oh
that might
no,
come
no.
across as
I would
aggressive.
say there's I love your formats because they are very actionable, they're very tactical. They don't and yet they are very scientifically approached. Like you talk about it in a very systematic manner. And so there is that uh, executive presence that you have that I could see through the screen. So it is like it is something that is that something you have cultivated over the years as you have worked in the industry, or is that something that just is you naturally? Is that how you have always been?
That's a good question. Well, thank you, first of all, for saying I executive presence, because I think that's something, this ambiguous concept that we all pursue. And some of us are magically told you have the unicorn, or some of you not. So that's something we pursue. I do think that certainly when I left academia and there wasn't much training around how to speak and how to be and how to communicate your ideas in a more succinct, pithy way, that's something I had to work towards, and it definitely takes a lot of practice for sure. And there's so many mornings I still do to this day. I get up and I look at myself really awkwardly and in the mirror and practice what I am going to say that day. So it's always a work in progress, and there's no one great model to do it. I think it is about, ultimately, executive presence is about, do you think this person comes across, they believe in what they're saying? Do they have conviction and confidence in what they are saying? That's why one can have executive presence even if they have different accents, even if their skin tone's different, even if their voice is loud or soft, or even if they speak slowly or fast. And people try to put formulas around what it is. But ultimately, it's this feeling that you get. You look at a person and say, this person truly believes in themselves. But if you really do believe in yourself, then it comes through. And I do think ultimately that is the executive presence.
Wow, that is amazing, and it is something that is not very openly talked about. Like, how do you build that? What do you have to become to project that, right? So this is amazing advice for anybody who feels like, okay, they need to have more executive presence. Just stand up in front of a mirror and start talking to yourself because you got this. That's pretty much what we have to convince and just be confident in who we are. So my question for you is, just considering you said it yourself, like what the younger generation is facing today and what's the future is looking like. There's no telling where everything is just with the sheer technological advances that we are seeing. Like literally, it feels like every day there's some new advancement happening. So it's frankly scary. Like, how does one keep up? Like, what are the things as a professional, uh, even a young woman, or even parents of girls? Like, how are we going to prepare them? What are we going to tell them to make sure that they not necessarily future proof their career, but be confident that they will do well in their careers? Like, what is the things that they should be focused on today?
So I do think that learning how to make decisions and those levers are important because, like you said, there's so many variables that change: tools, hype, virality, like the news. That learning how, what are the levers that are important to them as well as ethically. I think being very solid in their own personal framework of that decision making is going to be more important than ever, because this generation is going to have so many options. And it's not going to be about what is the right or the wrong option. It's going to be about, do you have a foundation of how you make decisions? How do you see something when you have so much noise? How do you say that is right versus that is wrong, right? So learning how to, whether it be because of media, literacy, or whether it be because now you have so much noise and you don't know what is ethically right or wrong or gray. Can you build a big foundation as to you have conviction around the right and wrong? I do think that that is going to be the baseline foundation that these young generations have to build, because when they're starting to come up with this information that you and I have probably never had to deal with at a young age, they're seeing it much earlier,
Yeah.
because of the exposure, and they don't have the context in which of their own moral compass, let's say some of them at that point is just getting formed, to plug those information in into the right place into their world. So building out the world context, um, on their own, with free from external information, so that when they get external information it gets slotted into the right place. I think that is going to be the game changer for people who are going to be fine in the future.
So not as much coding. There's more decision-making skills that they need to be
That's true,
focused
because
on.
even coding, we're starting to realize, for
You don't need
look
it.
how fast it changed, right? Like, in for 15 years, they're like, if you code, you'll be great set up for
Yeah.
life. But now with AI automating that, we're
They're
like,
like,
well, we don't even know if coding is the
yeah.
right thing to do.
Yeah, I heard the other day, coding is not the language now. It's English. English is the language you're going to tell. And everybody has to be good in that, or Spanish, or I guess Mandarin. Those are the languages to learn. So there's just such a shift in the perspectives and the requirements. And I feel like there are some basic skills that if you focus and make sure our kids are equipped with that, I think they'll be fine. They'll be fine. So this has been so much fun. I do have to end it with our fun trivia. So I have three
Okay.
questions for you, and that's it. Okay. So my first question is, what's a surprising or a quirky hobby you have that is outside of work?
Surprising or a quirky hobby?
It could be
Okay.
anything,
Um,
or just a hobby.
so okay, there's a couple things. I mean, I don't know how far we want to go with quirky here.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I'm curious.
Um, Actually, it's not surprising. Perhaps I'll go with not so much surprising or quirky. I'll share this. I like to learn, as I said, I like to learn all these different things. I also like to learn fun things. I like to learn random things. So some things I like to learn, and you get to do this when you're an adult and your mom doesn't make you do it. It's more fun this way. Even though your mom was right when you're younger, when
Yes.
you choose to do it, it feels different. Um, I like to learn. I like to do short hobbies. So, like for example, one year I decided to learn 3 songs on the piano, and I was very satisfied of having learned those 3 songs. I really like that aspect. I also, even when I travel, I like to have some sort of knowledge goal. So I like to pick different wine regions I like to learn about and pursue that knowledge as well. Um, and that's how I would say I spend my a lot of my time doing. And I also genuinely love learning about people. So, as introverted as I am, I do like to meet new people, like one at a time, and really talk about their lives and what makes them, how they see the world. So, I almost see it not as a socialization, but a hobby, because I constantly ask people, hey, is there someone interesting you think I should meet? And just learning from one person is like learning from 10 books.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Question number two. If you could only eat one cuisine for the rest of your life, what would you
Ooh.
choose?
I would probably say Italian. Italian food, I think a lot of people think pizza and pasta, which is
Yeah.
absolutely true. They
Yeah.
have amazing pizza and pasta, but the country is very big actually,
Yeah.
and it's a peninsula. So it actually covers seafood and meats and other aspects of the cuisine I don't think we appreciate as much.
Yeah.
So I do love Italian food.
Yeah. They do cheese it up a lot here, so it's a different cuisine here.
Yeah, but actually, I'll actually throw out something else. Something else. Maybe Italian's a more safe choice. I actually love Peruvian food.
Really?
So I do
I
think
haven't had
that,
that.
yeah, Peruvian food. Just an interesting history about Peru is they actually have so. I think I have to check the numbers. Maybe there's like 25 terrains in the world, and Peru has like 22 of them. They
Small.
have everything from a lot of the cuisine is dictated by the terrain, and Peru has all of them. They have the most. I had the most amazing Chinese food there. It's called shifu. I had the most amazing Japanese food there. I had the most amazing, of course, Latin American food there. So I would say Peru is probably what I think of as melting pot of foods and cultural amalgamation. So that's probably something I could also.
Fascinating. I need to check that out. Okay, so the third question is uh, a fun fact about neuroscience that you still uh, hold on to or you love telling others.
Fun fact about neuroscience
For the brain.
or the brain. I think the thing I wish more people knew about the brain
Mm.
is this dogma that when you're a child, your brain is plastic, and as you get age, your brain is not. It's just not true. The fun fact for me is that, and I actually think about this quite often as I'm learning something, is that your brain is actually always dynamically changing.
Mm.
It's like those Hogwarts, staircases that move within Hogwarts. I think of brain like that. Like brain synapses are changing and rewiring constantly. And I think that when we have new memories, new experiences, that is actually changing how your brain is wired and connected and how that's memory is done. Um, and I think if you think of your brain as this dynamic organ, I think people will really start to take advantage of what that means. More learning more
Yeah.
voraciously, or actually even taking better care of your brain. It's not this set and done, and it's that for the rest of your life. It's actually changing quite often. But I'll also tell you this: we still don't know why we sleep. I think that shocks people.
Oh my God. Really? Like we could go another hour on this. Just talk about that.
Exactly.
I'm
I mean,
fascinated by and yet people is like, you have to get your 8 hours of sleep.
exactly. We know it's so critical for function, and we know what happens in our brain during we
Yeah.
sleep. But why do we have to be sleeping? Like there isn't. We know we sleep. We have to sleep because it's good for us.
Yeah.
But why our brain
We know
just
what
decided?
happens when we don't sleep. We know that too.
Yeah, right. But then why fundamentally your brain becomes more active when we sleep, for example? It's not actually resting. Actually
Hmm.
it becomes much more active. So the science of sleep is something that really boggles my mind, but also boggles other people's mind. And they're definitely shocked when I tell them, brain isn't inactive when you sleep.
Huh.
So I think that's something.
Hey, that is
Um,
fascinating.
yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Juliet. This has been such a pleasure to talk to you, and I can't wait for our audience to listen to your story and all the wonderful insights that you have given for us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun for me as well.